Happy Father's Day to all of you, if you are a father, and even if you have a father. If you have, you men, if you have stayed with your wife and you have prayed for your children, if you have loved and disciplined and been an example of faithfulness, if you've done the best you could, which may not have been being so perfect, as just pointing to the perfect Father and Lord of all, then well done, and thank you, fathers. I hope you had a good father as I did. I miss him to this day and probably always will. He was a man of strength and humility and character and faith. He was a good example of what a godly man looks like. He showed me how to live and how to die with faith. Today you may be missing your dad, and you may be mourning the loss of your child if you are a dad. Maybe you're having to forgive your dad who was not good to you. Whatever the circumstances, thank the people who were dads to you. Be grateful to God for those who played the role in your life. The Blythe family sings a song looking at their father. It says, I see a man of God who lives what he believes, a man who shows the world what a Christian should be. I've watched your life. That's why I can say, I see a real man of faith. Grateful for the real men of faith in our lives. We've been reading about the crucifixion of Jesus this week in the story. Keep reading. We're almost done. Keep reading. Maybe you've heard this story a few times. And maybe if you've grown up with a Bible in your house or grew up going to church, you've heard it millions of times. Could I ask you to hear it one more time as if it's the first time? You may have noticed as you read this week that those around Jesus didn't really get it, what was happening, didn't understand it. How could they? Even Caiaphas, the high priest, had something to say and didn't understand it, but it was powerful. It's better, he said, it's better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. Jesus will die. But even before he gets to his death on a cross, he teaches his disciples and keeps teaching them even when they don't get it. So during a Passover meal, he shares with them in that upper room, here, take this, eat it. Take this, drink it. This is my body. This is my blood. A little later on, we will try to remember in the best way we can that same memorial moment as we do every Sunday to remember and honor and celebrate the sacrifice. During that meal, Jesus takes off his outer clothes, wraps a towel around his waist, gets a basin of water, washes their feet. It wasn't that their feet were dirty. I'm certain they were. It was that he needed to teach them what this was about. Sacrifice, servanthood, real washing, real cleansing. We will look at those verses as we commune later. During the meal, something else happened. Jesus spoke of the betrayer, and they all looked at each other and looked at Jesus. Is it me? Is it me? They didn't know. Jesus speaks to Judas. He turns to leave. He walks out, has to do his thing for 30 pieces of silver, delivering up Jesus, and they still don't know what he's doing. Jesus keeps teaching. He's talking more about him leaving, and they don't understand. But he'll come back to take them home. They don't seem to understand. You know the way he says, I don't know if they do, but he says, no, you do. And he says those famous words, I am the way and the truth and the life. They sing a hymn and they go to the garden, the one they all know well because they've all been there. That's how Judas will know where to find Jesus. Jesus has been praying, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. And he prays for his disciples in a beautiful prayer. I hope you read it. I hope you know it. He reminds them that they'll all flee. They'll all fall away that same night. They can't even believe it. What are you talking about? Peter vocalizes his objection, and they all agree. I mean, even if they leave you, I will not, Peter says. I will not. Jesus says, oh, Peter, before the rooster crows, you will deny me, disown me 3 times. Peter can't believe it. He protests some more. They get to Gethsemane. He leaves most of them over there, takes Peter, James, and John over here and goes with them, and then goes even farther than with them. So they're left here, and he wants them to just take care of things, just watch. He begins to be sorrowful, the scripture says, and troubled and overwhelmed to the point of death. He falls face down on that ground and starts praying, and he must pray harder than he's ever prayed before. My Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. He didn't want to face it. He didn't want to have to face it. He knew he would have to. And if he had to, that was fine, but he wanted to avoid it if he could. Is it possible? Is it just maybe possible? Which shows it wasn't possible. There must have been no other way to save the world. He kept praying the horrible death, that it would somehow bypass him, that he wouldn't have to, but he kept praying this too, but not as I will, as you will, as you will, as you will. Comes back to his disciples and they're sleeping. He wanted them to encourage him, but that was discouraging for him, had to be. They couldn't watch, they couldn't pray, they couldn't even stay awake. He goes back and prays the same theme of the same prayer. Let this be taken from me, but not as I will, as you will. And an angel comes and strengthens him, but an angel can't even save him from this. He prays so intently, it's not like sweat beating on his brow. It is as if he is bleeding. His sweat is pouring off of him. Anguish is not really an accurate, adequate word, but his suffering is beginning. 3 times he's gone away to pray. 3 times he comes back to his disciples. Each time they're sawing logs in slumber. He talks with them on that last time, and the mob, here they come approaching with their clubs, their swords, their torches, whatever they have. They're led by Judas, who plants a kiss on Jesus' cheek. The kiss that should be about friendship turns out to be it's about betrayal. It's the cue for them to take that man. Jesus offers himself up. They're blown away by his offer. Peter finally makes good on his promise. He's going to fight. He whips out a sword, starts swinging it around, hits an ear, just an ear, severs an ear. The man's name is Malchus, servant of the high priest. Jesus rebukes Peter and puts the ear back on for the man. Jesus walks away with his captors as his friends run to save their skin. Peter and John regain their senses, must be at some point, and start following at a distance so they know where Jesus goes. And he goes to the courtyard of the high priest, and they take him, usher him right inside, and they start the trial. Peter stays outside and he's warming himself at the fire. Hopefully he won't be recognized there. The trial of Caiaphas is a sham. It's not kosher. It's not legal. It's not fair. It's not even done well. Even the false witnesses can't get their false stories together to agree. Jesus speaks of being the Son of Man. They throw their blasphemy charges on him. The audacity of such a man to claim to be the Messiah. And they have him. They believe they have him now. They can kill him. The abuse has already started. They spit in his face and they slap him and they punch him and they mock him. Prophesy, Messiah, who hit you that time? Peter's trying to lay low in the darkness, but the glowing fire sheds too much light on him. A servant girl points him out as an acquaintance of Jesus. He denies it with, "Woman, I do not know him." Number 1. Somebody else picks him out and suggests he's probably one of them. He denies it. "Man, I do not. I am not." Number 2. I don't even know if he understands what's going on. Takes about an hour for the next to assert the same thing. He's figured out this guy is a Galilean. Peter acts ignorant now, disowning Jesus with, "I don't even know what you're talking about." That's 3. That's when the rooster crows and it all comes flooding back to Peter. It's what Luke points out next that always hits me hard, because right about then, somewhere inside the building as Jesus is being tried and abused, he turns and looks outside with Peter at the fire, and their eyes meet. Peter has just heard himself denying his friend. He hears in the background a rooster crowing, probably remembers now the words of his friend earlier that night who said, "You will do it," when he said, "I won't. There's no way I will." And then he has to look into the eyes of his friend, acting like he doesn't even know him. I don't know, it doesn't say, but I imagine Jesus' face right about now as there is some spittle dripping down off of this cheek. The angry man who put the loogie there. And on this side, there's probably some redness from the open-handed slaps. And right over here, maybe some blood is forming in the corner of his mouth from the punch that hit him. Peter did what he swore he would not do, and now that he's done it, what else could he do but go out and do what I would have done too, weep bitterly, probably the longest night of his life. By the way, I have felt the sense of failure and sorrow. I have imagined looking into the one who loves me and looks back at me directly with eyeball to eyeball. I don't want to look at him, not after what I have just done. But while I don't want to look at him, he is still willing to die for me in my sin. Judas feels the guilt too, tries to return the money. The Jewish leaders don't want the blood money, so he throws it down. He runs out and hangs himself. So Peter may be hating this night, but he'll get another shot at it. Judas is just hanging this night. Pilate now enters the story. They bring him to him because if they want to kill him, they have to have the governor's okay. Night has given way to morning. Pilate questions Jesus, keeps finding him innocent, while the rulers of his own people want him dead. Strange, he thinks. He tries to release him. At the Passover, that's the custom. I'll let one of your prisoners go. They want the insurrectionist, Barabbas, to be freed, and they want Jesus to die. Pilate can't figure out why they hate this guy so much. So he has Jesus flogged, a brutal whipping that took the life of weaker men. They mock him. His men mock him. They put a robe on his back and a fake scepter in his hand and a crown of thorns on his head. And they say, "Hail, King of the Jews," as they have a really good laugh. They're still slapping him and hitting him and mocking him. And Pilate wants to show this Jesus that you seem to fear. So after the flogging, he leads them out. But they're hungry for all of his blood, not a few drops. So they keep shouting, "Crucify, crucify, crucify." Pilate tries to free him. It doesn't work. It doesn't help. Just one of their many hypocrisies. They shout. The people shout, "Caesar is our true king." Pilate gives in and delivers him to be crucified. He carries his cross, at least part of it, stumbling under the weight so often. I guess they feel so bad for him, they ask the man from Africa, probably the darker skinned man, pick it up, carry it for him, get him to the place. His name's Simon. How could Simon have not been impacted by that? They get to the place of the skull. That's how it seemed to be. That's maybe what it looked like. And that's where they put him up. Not just him, two on either side of him, 3 crosses, 2 guilty, 1 innocent, the Son of Man, sitting, standing, hanging, dying in the middle. Those who watched, they couldn't get enough of this. Had to throw a few more barbs his way, just verbal insults, throwing it at him. "Hey, Jesus, come on down. Save yourself." The chief priests and teachers of the law, who should have known better, threw their taunts too. "He saved others." They didn't believe that. "He saved others, but he can't save himself. Let him come on down. If you do it, we'll believe." They didn't believe that. They wouldn't do that. Jesus could have been focused on himself, thinking, this is me, this is not right. But even while dying on a cross, he looks out and takes care of others, forgiving his killers, showing grace to a repentant thief, finding a new home for his mother. Hard for a human to watch, probably. If I could have been there, I would have probably averted my eyes. Maybe the sun in the sky thought the same thing as darkness now comes over the land for about 3 hours. And about 3 in the afternoon, Jesus calls out to God in his language, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani." I don't speak that language, but in English, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The writers don't even explain what that means. How could they? How could we understand what is going on just between the Father and the Son? The suffering of one man for all men. And that's the physical part. What about the emotional, the relational, the spiritual? For those hours she languished on the cross, bleeding out, fighting for every breath, feeling the pain, bearing the sins of the world. They're offering him now some wine vinegar as he prepares to die. He's ready. He's endured it. He's done with it. He's finished. And that's what he says. It is finished. And the earth shakes and the rocks split and the tombs break open and the temple curtain is torn. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert. This is not the end of the story. If you had never read it, you would never believe it, what comes next. You'll get to read that this week. Matt will talk about it on Sunday. A couple things to talk about, though, before we're done. There's a soldier there that seems to almost be a nobody, just a soldier of other soldiers, a centurion, a leader in the Roman military. He's not a Jew. He's not a follower of Jesus. He's just an innocent bystander in some ways, doing his job for the day, killing 3 more. This Gentile watches it all go down, and he's doing his job, and this Jesus of Nazareth is killed on a hill outside of Jerusalem. It has nothing to do with him. But he notices something different, and it gets to him. This challenges him. Watching this one die in the middle, it changes his thinking. He starts to believe something different, more than the Jews could, and he says it. He says what very few could say on that day. Surely this man was the Son of God. And once again, not just this gospel, it all comes back to this. It's about belief. It's about faith. And this one man, a Gentile, believes in Jesus. We're not done yet, but what about you? You're here on a Sunday. You're with church people, so you probably believe. But let me just ask, in case you may not know, in case you're watching at home, do you believe this? Is this Jesus, the Son of God? Is he the Messiah sent to save the world from their sins? It's hard to read this and just act like this is just a small deal in history. This is huge. Do you believe it? The cross of Jesus is powerful. It's about sacrifice. It's about redemption. It's about forgiveness. That's what Jesus said while dying to those who were killing him. Father, forgive them. They cannot know, do not know what they're doing. Did they understand this? Of course not. How could they? But do you? The cross is not just a good story, it is our story. Every sin of yours and mine were atoned for on that cross. The propitiation, the justification, the wrongs made right, the just punishment for all of our wickedness, for what we really deserved, it all came down on the innocent, pure, spotless, sinless Lamb of God. What we see is just a man dying on a rustic, simple, very effective Roman death machine. He's suffering and bleeding and dying. We see that, the thorns, the nails, the taunts, the torture, the death. But what we don't see is the bigger story. It's what Isaiah prophesied so many years before this. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, squarely on him. And by his wounds then we have been healed. This is how Paul wrote it in 2 Corinthians. God made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. This is not just a story, this is our story, because our response to his death is death too. Changing our ways, changing our status, changing our lives. But what is required of us is death. Baptism is death. 1 year ago, on this weekend, as the Valley News Live reported it, a 31-year-old father named Chris Schultz gave his life to save his son. 1 year ago yesterday, Father's Day weekend. Schultz, it says, leapt into action after his 3-year-old son crawled through the rail and fell off Long Bridge in Detroit Lakes. The dad went right in after him and managed to get his son, Ashton, managed to get him to the surface, but he struggled to keep his own head above water. So he was able to hand his boy off to a woman near the shore, but he could not stay above water himself, so he went down. The dive team came 30 minutes later. Pulled Chris from the water, took him quickly to the hospital, but he died a few hours before Father's Day. So sad and so understandable to a parent. Because what parent wouldn't do that? My life for my child's? Easy. Easy decision. Who wouldn't save their child from death? And this is why the story of the cross is incredible. When God had the opportunity, the Father could shield His Son from disaster, could protect His Son from harm, could save His life. Instead, He let Him die so that He could shield us, protect us, save us. He gave His Son's life so I could become His son. He could not at the same time save His Son from the moment and save us from eternal damnation. So He chose long before the cross, before the foundations of the world were even made. He chose to wrap His arms around us, and His Son would take the blows. He let His Son perish at the hands of sinful men so all of us could be saved. He could have saved His own Son from all of it, but watched Him die so we could be His. If the story of the cross doesn't touch you, doesn't affect you, doesn't change you, I don't know what could. And if Jesus doesn't save you, then no one else can. It happened way back then. And it's strange that some people still today are still slaves to sin. 2 days ago, many in our country were thinking about what happened back in 1865. The Union soldiers finally made their way to Galveston, Texas to deliver the good news to the slaves who could not have yet been free. But that's impossible because the Emancipation Proclamation was signed 2.5 years earlier. The problem was they hadn't got the good news. So finally on June 19th, their days of slavery were over. The good news changed their lives from that moment on. And there's a reason why Juneteenth is still a big deal today. The good news of Jesus has been told for centuries. It is still a big deal today, and some strangely may not know it. Some may have not heard it. The truth is, the slaves have been freed. The sinners have been forgiven. The lost have been found. And the world can be redeemed if they would just believe in Jesus. So do you believe the good news of Jesus? Let's stand and sing. Come if you need to.